Today we will be discussing assessment as learning, and the paper is sourced by Ruth Dan, and it's titled Assessment as Learning: Blurring the Boundaries of Assessment and Learning for Theory, Policy, and Practice. So, as Sir also briefly mentioned at the beginning, we have often, when we speak about effective assessments, the larger part of the discussion, even in terms of research, is on what we see in the middle here, that is assessment for learning, that is formative assessments. So, as a concept, this assessment as learning is something that builds up on the thing prior to it. That is, from the idea of formative assessments, we look into what assessments as learning is. So, as all of you can see on the screen, assessment of learning looks at summative assessments, for formative, and as is mostly on students' metacognition. Now, by students' metacognitions, what we mean here is for the students' ability to reflect and learn what they have learned. So, moving forward, we will be exploring some of the aspects of this particular phenomena, which we, call assessment as learning. So, very briefly, if I have to put it, assessment of learning here, the teacher uses inferences. For assessment for learning, the teacher uses evidence. Okay, ये student को आता है, ये नहीं आता, आगे इस पे काम करना है. But whereas in assessment as learning, which is highlighted in yellow on this little chart, here the onus is on the student. The students reflect and monitor their own progress. So just to make the concept slightly more clear, here in assessments is not just seen as an adjunct to teaching and learning. Teaching, learning, assessment, ऐसे हम उसको तीन जगह से divide नहीं करते. Here we look at assessments as a process. Pupil involvement can be featured as a part of learning. Like while the student or the pupil is doing assessments, we are ensuring that he or she is also learning something. Secondly, it is a complex interplay of assessment, teaching, and learning. Instead of looking at it as a linear perspective, that first we teach, then the student learns, and then we take the assessment. Assessment as learning does not make these separations. It sees the entire process as a complex interplay. So the core idea here is that pupils must understand their own learning process and goals through a range of processes which themselves are cognitive events. So, what is the heart of AAL? It is pupil self-assessment. So, the paper talks about three different aspects here. First is self-regulation. Second is self-production, and then curiosity, not in any particular order. But what research says is that if students are involved in these three cognitive processes, assessments become a process through which one will absolutely learn. So some questions that we can ask as learners to ourselves, or students can ask themselves while they're giving assessments is, what is the purpose of learning this? The second question could be, what do I know about this topic? Then what strategies do I know that will help me learn this? Am I understanding these concepts? What are the criteria for improving my work? And have I accomplished the goals I set for myself? So if we look at these range of questions, for instance, the question about what strategies do I know that will help me learn this? Here, the student thinks about how he or she can start. It is not about how they will learn this, but is there any strategy which will help me learn this better? So thinking is already in process. So it is something that is continuous. And then, as we also mentioned, the role of feedback in assessment of learning, in assessment as learning, is a very, very important criteria that we talk about. Because when we talk about assessment as learning, what the teacher or what the instructor is formally conveying to the student or informally conveying to the student, that also becomes learning. For instance, एक report card, progress card हम जिसको बोलते हैं, we may give something in written. But even in the classroom, the way I am responding to the student or the way you are responding to the student, that also could be called as a feedback. Students are continuously taking cues from it. So feedback becomes a very important aspect in that, and the elaboration of this particular domain will be done in the next section. But here, Complex skills such as monitoring and self-regulation become routine only when there is constant feedback and practice using these skills, right? Unless we tell them कि अच्छा this is what needs to be corrected or this is what needs to be enhanced, there is no purpose of continuously monitoring regulation unless we are also correcting them in the process. So feedback in AAL primarily talks about three things. Here, the attention is largely on the task on and not on getting the answer right. Second, it provides us students with ideas for adjusting, for rethinking, articulating their understanding. And it should lead to another round of feedback and another extension of learning. So again, when we think of feedback of assessment, we think, okay, feedback mil gaya, it's done. Now let's move on to the next topic. But no, feedback should serve in a way which should be an extension of their learning. So feedback should not be a full stop, but feedback should be delivered in a way which opens up more questions, which opens up more avenues for learning. So moving ahead, we come down to some of the suggestions that we have. So for schools, some of the suggestions we have is first, to create an environment where it is safe for students to take chances and where support is readily available, especially in these times. We are moving towards slightly more progressive systems of education, and assessment as learning is also slightly a new concept. So when we are making these colossal moves, it is very important for students, for them to also feel safe. Okay, if I'm doing this, if I want to self reflect, if I want to assess myself, I need time. So as an environment, as a school, as an institution, it should be our aim to also provide students with these opportunities and with these provisions and allow them to self-reflect. Second, monitor students' metacognitive processes as well as their learning. So when I say monitor students' metacognitive processes, here I largely I'm talking about assessment rubrics, which we have, of course, also spoken about previously. So when, as a school, as an institution, when we are creating assessment rubrics, are we giving space to ideas like self-reflection? Are we giving space for peer assessment? Because end of the day, these marks are not counting. There is a huge possibility that students may not be involved. So when we are creating rubrics, when we are creating assessment patterns, we should be able to monitor the metacognitive processes. Third, provide students a way to use formal as well as informal feedback to enhance their learning. Here, very simply, if I put it, okay, formal feedback is often given in the form of progress cards or report cards, but even informal feedback, for instance, this is something that all of us can do interpersonally in classrooms, like devise our own methods of feedbacks, which may not be on paper, but being in constant touch with students informally as well. Maybe, creating a Google Meet, a Google Classroom, and always taking in their doubts and other suggestions. For teachers, we suggest for them to encourage self-assessment, peer assessment, and reflection. Second, guiding the students in developing internal feedback mechanisms for two things: to validate and question their own thinking, and become comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty that is inevitable in learning something new. So the first step being that, okay, when we start something big, when we start something new, we may feel lost sometimes, but also, conveying to the students that it is okay. We're all in the process of learning. And when I talk about validating and questioning their own thinking, instead of just, I would take it back to the banking concept. Instead of just transferring knowledge, enable them and provide them with the mechanisms to start questioning their own beliefs and their own thinking. And lastly, to provide them with regular and challenging opportunities to practice. Instead of making it easy, ki chalo theek hai, pass kar dete hai, ya koi, make challenging questions, create a classroom that generates excitement and enables curiosity.